The King of Cool has officially taken his final bow. Today, the world lost a true legend as the devastating news broke that Dean Martin passed away peacefully in the comfort of his Beverly Hills estate in California. Naturally, as the heartbreaking news rippled through Hollywood, all eyes immediately turned toward Palm Springs, expecting Frank Sinatra to step into the spotlight to honor his fallen brother. But the chairman of the board was ghosting the world. These two men defined an entire generation, their brotherhood etched into history through the golden haze of the Rat Pack era. However, when it came time to lay Martin to rest, Sinatra's empty seat screamed louder than any eulogy could, sparking immediate whispers and wild speculation. Everyone was asking the same burning question. Why on earth did old Blue Eyes snub the funeral of his best friend to the very end? Well, buckle up, because the truth behind that conspicuous absence is far more layered and heartbreaking than the tabloids would have you believe. To understand the end, we have to go back to the beginning. We are talking over 80 years ago, back in the gritty 1940s, when two hungry kids were just trying to survive the cutthroat trenches of the show business world. By then, Sinatra was already making waves. Known simply as The Voice, he was the original teen idol, causing riots in the streets and making Bobby Soxers swoon before rock and roll was even a thought. He possessed a vocal texture like velvet and a stage presence so emotionally raw that he didn't just sing songs, he lived them. The ladies worshipped him, and he was rapidly cementing his status as the industry's next heavyweight. Meanwhile, Dino was taking a different route, grinding his way up from the bottom, fighting for every scrap of attention he could get. He cut his teeth in the smoky dive bars and nightclubs of New York before heading west to Los Angeles, armed with nothing but lethal charm and a demeanor so relaxed he looked like he was lounging in his living room. But his secret weapon was his comedy. That brilliant, effortless timing would eventually pair him with the manic Jerry Lewis, launching them into the stratosphere as the biggest comedy duo on the planet. As the 1940s drew to a close, the American showbiz scene was a tight little circle of sharks and stars. It was inevitable that the orbits of Sinatra and Martin would eventually collide. They haunted the same watering holes, the VIP lounges, and the legendary after-hours joints where the booze flowed freely until sunrise. It was in these smoke-filled rooms that the hungry up-and-comers rubbed shoulders with the silver screen royalty, everyone looking for their next big break. Personality-wise, they were oil and water. Frank was a wired, high-strung perfectionist who treated every performance like a battle he had to win. Dean, he was the human embodiment of a shrug, breezy and unbothered. But you know what they say about opposites. That friction didn't drive them apart. It pulled them together, igniting a fascination that would turn into a brotherhood. Frank's manic drive and obsession with detail baffled Dean, yet he couldn't help but respect the hustle. Conversely, Frank looked at Dean and saw something he could never be totally at peace. He envied that effortless cool, that ability to walk onto a stage without a drop of sweat. By the time the 1950s rolled around, that mutual respect had hardened into a rock-solid alliance. They started popping up in each other's acts, but the real glue was Las Vegas. The desert oasis was calling, and they were both drawn to its neon promise, like moths to a flame. Back then, Vegas wasn't the corporate mega resort it is today. It was the Wild West of entertainment, a sandbox for the mob and the stars, and it was waiting for kings to claim it. Frank, who always knew a guy who knew a guy, started dragging Dean along to the most exclusive underground gatherings the city had to offer. These were the nights where the real deals were made over tumblers of Jack Daniels, surrounded by the haze of cigar smoke and the distant chime of slot machines. Make no mistake, this wasn't just partying, this was calculated survival. It was high-stakes networking. They were learning the dark arts of the industry, watching each other's backs and realising that having a true friend in a town full of snakes was invaluable. Even though they were different species, their jagged edges fit together perfectly, laying the groundwork for a friendship that would dominate headlines for 40 years. Frank was the fire volatile, explosive and demanding. Dean was the ice-cool, detached and impossible to rattle. Together, they created a thermal dynamic that the public couldn't look away from. Through countless nights of debauchery, shared secrets, and Vegas escapades that probably should have been illegal, they built a bond that went deeper than just showbiz. It was a trench brotherhood born from the shared trauma and glory of rising to the absolute top of the world. Then came the 1960s. This was the peak, the summit, the era where Frank and Dean didn't just live in the world, they owned it. They were the beating heart of the Rat Pack, standing shoulder to shoulder with the wildly talented Sammy Davis Jr., along with the deadpan Joey Bishop and the Kennedy-connected Peter Lawford. They turned Las Vegas into their personal living room, and the rest of us were just guests. They concocted a magic formula of swing music, slapstick comedy, and pure masculine swagger that looked accidental, but was actually brilliant theatre. The Rat Pack wasn't just a band or a comedy troupe, it was a movement. It was the ultimate branding of cool. They sold a lifestyle of booze, broads, and brotherhood that captivated every man in America and charmed every woman. Frank commanded the stage like a general leading troops, while Dean wandered around like he was looking for the bar. That interplay was electric, a mix of rehearsed genius and genuine affection. You can't fake that kind of connection. That only comes from years of spilled whiskey and shared secrets. And the Copa Room at the Sands Hotel that was ground zero, that stage became holy ground for entertainment history. People would bribe maitre d's and sleep in lobbies just for a chance to squeeze into that room, desperate to see the summit in session. It was a variety show on steroids. You had Frank's heartbreaking ballads, Dean's boozy slurring, which was mostly an act, by the way, and a constant stream of insults that blurred the line between a show and a private roast. If you saw them on Tuesday, the Wednesday show would be completely different. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. They made a room of 500 people feel like they were just hanging out in Frank's basement. That intimacy was their superpower. Frank was the straight man and the ringleader, trying to keep the circus moving, making sure the music hit hard. And there was Dean, the chaotic element, flicking cigarette ash on Frank's suit or cutting the tension with a one-liner that would bring the house down. It was a perfect storm of energy, structured yet loose, intense yet hilarious, untouchable yet welcoming. They were the kings of the world, and for a while we were just lucky to watch them reign. When the Rat Pack wasn't busy owning the nightclub scene, they were expanding their empire into Hollywood, most notably with the release of the original Ocean's 11 back in 1960. This wasn't just a movie starring Sinatra, Martin, Lawford, Bishop and Davis. It was basically a cinematic documentary of their wild, off-the-clock bromance. On the silver screen, they portrayed a squad of smooth, impeccably dressed and lovable crooks plotting to rob Las Vegas blind. The fascinating part was that the electric chemistry you saw in the theatres was an exact mirror of their real-world dynamic. For the general public, it became impossible to tell where the script ended and the Rat Pack's actual booze-fueled lifestyle began. Audiences were absolutely captivated by the narrative that Frank and Dean shared an unbreakable bond, a magnetic connection that flowed effortlessly from the Sands Hotel stage right onto the movie screen. This era didn't just entertain, it fundamentally constructed the image of what cool looked like in mid-century American nightlife. Frank and Dean in particular were anointed as the gods of swagger, the absolute peak of confidence, charm and high-class sophistication. To say they were just co-workers would be a massive understatement. In the eyes of the world, they were joined at the hip, their public images tangling together in a way that made them seem larger than life and twice as mysterious. Every single night they wrote the rulebook on celebrity status in 1960s America. They were more than just talented vocalists. They were magnetic forces of nature, cracking jokes and commanding absolute attention the second they walked into a room. Their run together during that decade secured their places in history, leaving a legacy across music and film that we still look back on with envy in 2026, chasing that lost glamour. However, as the calendar flipped to the 1970s, the cracks began to show in the once ironclad brotherhood between Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. The drift wasn't malicious, but rather the inevitable result of their lives and careers moving in two completely different directions. Sinatra remained a relentless machine dominating the entertainment landscape with a fierce ambition and a work ethic that bordered on obsession. The man simply refused to slow down or let his career stall. He kept churning out chart-topping albums, selling out massive tours and starring in major TV specials, ensuring he remained the consummate professional who defied the passage of time. Frank's persona, aggressive, confident and tireless, remained a permanent pillar of American pop culture. He was an immovable object even as the musical tides turned, whereas Dean Martin started to drift away from the chaos. After spending 30 years as the centre of attention, Dean began stepping back from the gruelling, non-stop pace of the industry. Although he had conquered film, television and the music charts, the heavy burden of constant scrutiny and performance started to take a serious toll on him. This slow retreat turned into a full-blown withdrawal following a heart-shattering personal tragedy in 1987. His world was completely upended by the death of his son, Dean Paul Martin, in a horrific plane crash. The loss broke him, leaving an emotional wound so deep that he never truly recovered from the shock. Martin turned inward, becoming a recluse and turning down the high-voltage public appearances that used to be his bread and butter. While he never lost that signature wit, the grief cast a long, dark shadow over him, and he increasingly preferred the safety of his home over the glare of the spotlight. Sinatra, ever the ringleader and loyal pal, tried desperately to fix the situation the only way he knew how, with a show. He masterminded the 1988 Together Again tour, forcefully reuniting himself, Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. The goal was to bottle that old lightning and relive the glory days of the Rat Pack era. When the news broke, fans went wild, desperate to see the three legends back together, hoping for a return of that effortless, whiskey-soaked charm. But reality hit hard, and the tour immediately exposed just how much things had changed between the two men. Dean found the brutal travel schedule unbearable, and according to insiders felt like he was just a prop in Frank's show, overshadowed by Sinatra's domineering personality. The loose, playful vibe that used to make their act legendary was replaced by palpable tension and sheer physical exhaustion. It was a painful reminder that time and circumstances had fundamentally altered their relationship. Despite a few flashes of the old magic, Dean walked away from the tour early, a shocking move that highlighted the massive emotional and professional canyon that had opened up between them. That easygoing rhythm, the late-night banter, and the affectionate roasting they were famous for were gone. The shared magic of the stage was something that simply couldn't be resurrected. Sinatra continued to be a whirlwind of energy and power, while Dean retreated further into a quiet, solitary life. Their bond, which once defined the very essence of Las Vegas, glitter, and Hollywood cool, existed now only in memory, stripped of the vitality it had during their heyday. By the time the 1980s came to a close, their relationship bore little resemblance to the inseparable partnership of the past. It had evolved into a distant, quiet companionship defined by mutual respect, nostalgia, and a bittersweet acceptance of the end. The relentless march of time and personal tragedy had reshaped even this, the most famous of friendships. As the early 1990s rolled in, the once loud and vibrant connection between Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin had faded to a whisper. It was a silence shaped by the unavoidable frailty of age-health battles and the heavy price paid for a lifetime spent in the show business trenches. For decades, Sinatra had been the ultimate powerhouse, radiating unstoppable charisma and authority on every stage he touched. But suddenly the armour began to crack, revealing shocking signs of physical weakness. The world let out a collective gasp in 1991 when he suffered a massive heart attack. It served as a brutal wake-up call, shattering the illusion that the man everyone thought was bulletproof was actually just as fragile as the rest of us. That frightening medical emergency slammed the brakes on his career, kicking off a painful few years where he fought nasty battles with pneumonia and a heartbreaking fade of his legendary memory. The dynamo, who once seemed to have an infinite supply of energy, was now trapped in a failing vessel, forced to confront the harsh limitations of his body and mind. He was paying the steep price for old age sickness and the decades of non-stop high-pressure grinding that had built his empire. Meanwhile, Dean Martin was secretly waging a desperate war against his own deteriorating health. A lifetime of chain smoking and living life in the absolute fast lane had ravaged his system, leaving him frail and battling emphysema, along with a host of other chronic issues. By this point, the King of Cool had basically vanished into the shadows, turning his back on the fame game and rarely, if ever, bothering to pick up a microphone. He completely shunned the neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip and the Hollywood red carpets that had served as the backdrop for his wildest and most iconic moments. While the Rat Pack glory days painted him as the life of the party who never went home, the 1990s revealed a drastically different man who just wanted peace and quiet. He transformed into a total recluse, finding comfort only within the four walls of his house, surrounded by a tiny protective squad of family and loyal pals. Even though a massive wedge of physical distance and health drama had driven them apart, the brotherhood they built over 40 years of chaos couldn't just disappear. The ghosts of their wild all-nighters, the backstage antics, and those history-making shows kept them spiritually connected, a bond that refused to die. Sure, Frank and Dean weren't exactly chatting on the phone every day, and that electric chemistry they once shared had dimmed with age and isolation. But the roots of their friendship went so deep that no amount of time, sickness, or silence could ever truly sever the tie between them. Their relationship had morphed from the loud, boozy public spectacle of the glory days into something much more solemn, a silent private nod to the scars and stars they shared. It became a mutual understanding of the incredible highs and the devastating lows that only the two of them could truly comprehend. Sadly, the 1990s weren't filled with jokes and reunions. They were defined by a deafening silence that hung between the two legends. The days of them walking on stage together to thunderous applause were over, replaced by a void where their magic used to be. Fans who once lived for Frank's fiery energy clashing with Dean's I don't care attitude were left clinging to old records and fading memories of a better time. All that remained were the occasional stories whispered in interviews harkening back to when they ruled the world with a drink in one hand and a mic in the other. Both icons were staring down the barrel of their final days, a grim illustration that all the fame in the world can't stop the clock or heal a broken body. Frank refused to go quietly, still trying to lay down tracks and forcing himself out for appearances whenever he could muster the strength. Dean, on the other hand, became a ghost, barely visible on screen or stage, a heartbreaking shell of the vibrant, hilarious superstar everyone adored. Then came the tragic news that shattered hearts everywhere Dean Martin took his final breath inside his Beverly Hills mansion on Christmas Day 1995 at 78 years old. The fact that he left this world on a day meant for joy and family gatherings made the loss feel even heavier and more cruel for his millions of fans. He was the undisputed King of Cool, the man who made everything look easy. He spent a lifetime crafting an image of pure, unbothered charm and quick-witted humour that no one else could replicate. But beneath that velvet voice and the scotch-in-hand swagger was a man tortured by tragic personal losses, failing health and the crushing weight of decades in the limelight. His death wasn't just a news story, it was the definitive end of a golden era, a moment that saw the entire globe weeping for one of the greatest entertainers mid-century America ever produced. People from Tokyo to New York weren't just missing a singer or a comedian, they were mourning a charismatic force of nature. This was the guy whose very existence defined the swagger of Las Vegas nights, the glitz of Hollywood, and the rebellious myth of the Rat Pack. Even though he had spent his final years hiding from the world, his passing served as a massive reminder of the permanent scar in the best way possible he left on the entertainment industry. Fellow stars and admirers poured out tributes, obsessing over his supernatural ability to make the impossible look like a walk in the park. He had this freakish talent for mixing side-splitting comedy with pitch-perfect vocals, impeccable timing, and a genuine warmth that made every person in the audience feel like his best friend. Unlike the media circuses that usually surround the deaths of mega celebrities, Dean's exit was dignified and quiet. His final goodbye was kept strictly under wraps, perfectly mirroring the private, introspective man he had evolved into during his twilight years. He had become reserved, looking inward rather than seeking the applause, distancing himself from the relentless flashing cameras he once welcomed. They laid him to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, but it wasn't a blockbuster event. It was deliberately tiny and personal. This decision screamed of Dean's final wish for dignity and privacy, choosing quiet respect over one last show-stopping performance. The guest list was locked down tight, restricted to just his nearest blood relatives and the handful of ride-or-die friends who had been there through the laughter and the tears. Of course, the few who made the cut were absolute titans of the industry who came to pay their respects. Jerry Lewis, his estranged but reconciled comedy soulmate, was there, along with Don Rickles, the sharp-tongued legend who had roasted and toasted Dean for years. And Bob Newhart, another icon of quiet, dry humour, stood by to say a final farewell to the master of cool charm. You know, the service wasn't exactly the massive, glitzy Hollywood spectacle everyone expected. Instead, it was defined by quiet tears, intimate stories, and the kind of genuine goodbyes that really hit you in the gut. Honestly, it was the perfect final curtain call for a man who managed to be a global superstar while somehow keeping his true self hidden away from the prying eyes of the public. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. Frank Sinatra wasn't there. His empty chair at Dean Martin's funeral sent shockwaves through the crowd of mourning fans and famous friends, though insiders knew the heartbreaking truth behind the snub. By the time the mid-90s rolled around, Old Blue Eyes was a shadow of the powerhouse legend we all remember. He just wasn't that swaggering, unstoppable force of nature anymore. Gone was the man who could snap his fingers and command the attention of the entire world, dominating silver screens and concert halls with just a single look. Decades of non-stop touring, living life in the fast lane, and the crushing weight of being the biggest star on the planet had finally caught up with him, leaving deep scars that no amount of makeup could hide. When Dean passed away, Sinatra was in incredibly bad shape, fighting a losing battle against severe heart disease and the terrifying confusion-filled early stages of dementia. Just getting out of bed or hopping on a plane wasn't simple anymore. Even the most basic travel plans turned into a logistical nightmare that his fragile body simply couldn't handle. For a guy whose entire legacy was built on being sharp, energetic, and endlessly charismatic, the physical toll of public appearances had become an impossible mountain to climb. But look, it wasn't just about his failing health. There is a deeper, more personal reason why Frank might have chosen to stay home that day. You have to understand that Dean Martin was a guy who famously craved his privacy, always preferring a quiet drink alone over the chaotic noise of the spotlight. Unlike Frank, who thrived on the flashbulbs and even courted the press, Dean spent his whole life dodging the drama, and he certainly didn't want his final exit to turn into a media circus. The burial at Westwood Village Memorial Park was designed to be tiny and exclusive, a strict invite-only affair kept under tight wraps. It was meant strictly for blood relatives and a handful of ride-or-die pals, like Jerry Lewis, Don Rickles, and Bob Newhart, people who actually knew the man, not just the myth. If Sinatra had shown up, you bet your bottom dollar the paparazzi would have swarmed the place, like vultures turning a solemn moment into a chaotic tabloid feeding frenzy, which is exactly what Dean's family wanted to avoid. So by staying away, Frank might have actually been performing one last act of love for his best friend, protecting Dean's moment of peace. It was his way of respecting the King of Cool's desire for a low-key send-off, a gesture of silence that spoke louder than any eulogy he could have ever delivered. However, don't think for a second that this was purely a logical decision. The emotional devastation Frank felt was absolutely crushing. Sources close to the chairman of the board later whispered that he was simply too shattered, too broken-hearted to stand by a grave and watch his brother go into the ground. Even though they had drifted apart and didn't talk much in those twilight years, you can't erase the bond they shared. Their brotherhood was the backbone of Sinatra's life, a connection that defined who he was just as much as his music did. From the wild days of the late 1940s all the way through the golden age of the Rat Pack, Frank and Dean were inseparable, sharing stages, secrets, booze, and the kind of success most people only dream of. Their dynamic was the heartbeat of mid-century American culture, a partnership that wrote the rulebook on how to be cool. They blended that effortless charm with sharp humour and a mutual respect that captivated the entire world, creating a legacy that journalists are still obsessing over today. Thinking back on all that history combined with his own deteriorating mind and body, the idea of saying a final goodbye probably felt like a knife to the heart that Frank just couldn't survive. Then on May 14th, 1998, the inevitable happened. Frank Sinatra left us at the age of 82. That day marked the official heartbreaking end of the Rat Pack era, closing the book on a time when he and Dean Martin ruled the world with nothing but talent tuxedos and attitude. Sinatra dying wasn't just about losing a singer. It felt like the lights went out in Vegas for good. It symbolised the finale of a cultural masterpiece, ending a chapter of entertainment history that shaped the 20th century in ways we will probably never see again. Together, Frank and Dean crafted an image of untouchable style, an addictive cocktail of wit and musical brilliance. They were the living, breathing spirit of Las Vegas nights, Hollywood glamour, and the golden age of American nightlife, setting a bar that no modern celebrity has ever been able to reach. The bond they forged over decades of filming movies, singing duets and partying until sunrise was the glue that held the Rat Pack myth together. Even long after the applause faded and the curtains closed, their legendary friendship remains the ultimate symbol of loyalty and cool. So what's your take on the drifting relationship between Frank and Dean in their later years? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. I want to hear what you think. I really hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood history. If you did, please smash that like button, share this with a friend, and hit subscribe for more celebrity stories. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.